if you want to build a coaching business, if you want to build any business, there's one unavoidable activity that is required for success, and that is selling. Some people love it, some people hate it. I've personally been on a journey where I've really grown to love the process of discovering what people's needs are and then connecting that to the right solution and navigating the different responses, objection handling, the follow-ups. I've really grown to love the process, but it wasn't always that way. I remember my first few sales calls especially were me just being so shaken by any hint of negative response around myself or my coaching that rendered me almost paralyzed. And so last night we spoke a little bit about how to deal with negative responses in a coaching call, but also in a sales process with Lawrence Byrne last night. And so here are a couple of steps. Here are some things to consider if you perhaps are also at a place where you feel a little bit scared or hesitant or unsure, especially how to navigate negative responses in a sales discussion. So the first thing to acknowledge before even getting onto the call is that you're dealing with another human being with their own sets of experiences and traumas and perceptions, and they're bringing that into this conversation with you. And oftentimes their reaction to you or what you say or your program or whatever says a lot more about who they are than about what is the actual truth about you. The unfortunate reality is that, and this is point number 2, you could say, is we tend to receive negative feedback as an attack on our value. And I think that's the first thing that we're wanting to assess when we feel that emotion. Firstly, it's okay to feel that emotion, but to ask the question, and this is what Lawrence Byrne was saying last night, am I safe? And that's a question of value. And then that points to, well, where do I find my safety and my value? Another way of saying it is, am I valued? And the answer should be yes. And if the answer is not yes, then oftentimes that's an opportunity to really lean into a space of healing from some kind of trauma that is being triggered through this negative reaction. So once you've established your sense of value and your sense of safety and acknowledging that this isn't necessarily an attack on your value, but rather this is just indicating something about them and perhaps even a trauma that they've experienced before that is now flaring up as a result of the conversation. Then you switch from defense to curiosity. And curiosity is that magic thing that allows you to open the door for not just de-escalating the tension in the discussion and opening the chance for reestablishing rapport, but also, and the most important thing, is learning about the other person. And if you just learn to master just this one skill, I promise you it would radically transform the value that you can bring to pretty much any scenario that you can think of, in business, in your work, in your relationships. And so we're wanting to really learn, what is this tension revealing about this person? So here's an example of what a response might sound like. You might say something like, I can tell that you were impacted by what was said. And if you're open, I would love to learn what it was that made you feel that way. And then finally, as the leader, you always want to be asking yourself the question, in what ways could I have potentially contributed to this tension in the discussion? It's likely in many cases that it was mostly the other person, but there's often times where we bring an agenda or a vibe, or we say something or potentially say it in a hostile way that makes the other person feel unsafe and triggers them. And so this is, of course, part of our ongoing development as communicators, as leaders. And so we want to constantly be asking ourselves and challenging ourselves to find better and better ways of communicating, of getting messages across, of serving people and leading people to the very best decision for their own growth.